I believe in the next month, we're about to see our world being unleashed with these really interesting cast of digital characters. So, digital labor is what I call them in the SecOps world. I'm not sure how close you've been to that space of SecOps, but it's evolved into platforms, and I've been hearing the term autonomous SOC being whispered. And there's some clear roadmaps around what the expectation is around that. And I put the question out there and I said, what if digital labor was your newest hire? How would you onboard it? And how would you know it's doing a good job? And there was a lot of extensive work I did behind this. So, what I did is took the MITRE 11 strategies. A few of them are really focused on the mission and objective of the SOC, the data quality that goes into the SOC, collaborating, etc. And so when you put the AI lens over that, you still have to ask yourself those questions. Are those agents capable of making those judgments? Where and when do you have the human labor in the loop? But so much of my world is in the browser. Generally, you only ever have an Outlook open and your browser window, and the browser's turned into my personal workspace, but there's no protection and safeguards in place. What I love about the SquareX solution is we're not introducing a new browser that's hard coded and all safeguarded, but we're adding an extension, so we're meeting the user. Again, we're thinking human centric solution, so we're not making it cumbersome for them, but we're almost training them to get familiar with, oh, if I click on this, is this okay?
What happens when AI stops being just a tool and starts becoming a collaborator? Meet Vriti Magee, founder and principal of Mawa Consulting. Vriti's work involves advising leadership on navigating AI, security, and digital transformation. She was also a delegate at the recent Security Field Day 14, bringing her insights on human centric AI to the tech community. I'm excited to be hearing from her today. Thanks for joining us, Vriti.
Hey, John, thanks for having me here.
Great. Yeah, thanks for coming on so late your time to join us on the podcast. Really appreciate your dedication to the to the show here. So, but let's talk about your career journey and a little bit about your philosophy on AI and such. You've worked with some of the world's leading consulting firms such as EY and KPMG before founding Mawaga Consulting. What's the story behind the name and what made you decide to go independent and focus on human centric AI strategy?
That's a great place to start, John, because Mawaga really began as an experiment, part curiosity, part conviction. And I didn't have a grand business plan. It was a personal experiment that grew legs. Before I go into the meaning behind the name, I'd love to call out my experience with what I call the big four trifecta. So, not just two, I worked with three of them: PwC, KPMG, and EY. And each firm shaped how I think about trust, architecture, and leadership in very different ways. That's my friendship circles, my personal network, and mentors that really encouraged me to think independently. I'll call out three interesting engagements I worked on. One of them was at PwC, and this was fantastic because it was an opportunity to design the privacy operating model of a top 100 global bank. And we had invited PwC SME from the US, Peter Cullens. Peter's legendary in the privacy world. He often presents in Brussels with the likes of Tim Cook, etc. And what really stood out for me was one of the comments Peter made. This was back in 2018. He said, Tesla's not an AV company, it is data is the product. And I thought, oh, wow, that was a really interesting moment. And when we think about AI today, that all comes together in a very interesting way. Another interesting engagement I'd love to chat about is Uber. So I had the opportunity to work on the security architecture. And the scope of my work really was the driver onboarding and driver offboarding experience. And before I came onto that Uber engagement, I thought Uber was all about me, the rider. I get in, it's my ride, I get from A to B, and I get a nice experience and it's cost effective. I don't need to book a taxi cab. But when I did that work, I realized it was all about the driver. And Uber was about to release the wallets and the deliveries, etc. So completely changed my way of thinking about security. And you touched on the words human centric. So it was all about the driver's experience. It was also their livelihood. So the drivers tend to be a more challenged demographic. So really keeping that front and center of mind when doing that piece of work for Uber. The last one, which is probably you'll relate to given your multiple CISO experience, was this opportunity where I was called in to what we call pension funds in Australia. So I was called in to the third largest pension fund at that point in Australia. And to give you a bit of sense of the scale of funds under management, we're talking 85 billion US dollars. I was called in as a technical security architect to come and finish a series of multiple projects. And their CISO walked out because the regulator was coming in with an auditor to see if they'd met regulation. And I joined in into a couple of calls, and all of a sudden it was announced that I was the acting CISO. So, typical Big Four world, you get thrown in on the deep end. And actually, that was the most career defining moment for me. I had imposter syndrome at this upper end of the scale, and but with the support of the CTO and CFO, I just learned that as long as you have a bit of common sense and you don't have to have all the answers, but there's inner thinking about, hey, I'm responsible for securing the funds of the pensioners in Australia. And the gravity of that really helped drive those conversations. And we walked away really well. We got board endorsement, more funding for the cyber team. So that was way back in 2022. Fast forward to 2025, April this year, the combined superannuation, the pension fund industry, was impacted by a targeted cyber attack. So if you look up the headlines, I think all the attackers got away was what, $500,000. But when you look at what the combined pension funds are worth, I believe it's 2.8 trillion US dollars. So good practices, good thinking. And for me, when I think of my work in security, I always put my architecture hat on. When I say architecture, my philosophy is something a real life architect said. So, Sir Christopher Wren, he designed the St. Paul's Cathedral, and he said, architecture aims at eternity. And that stuck with me. So, if we've thought about data consolidation and network security, all the good practices, AI or no AI, we've got the opportunity for the organization to transform. I know you asked me about the meaning of the name Mawaga. I didn't quite address that. So it's said as Mawaga, and it's an Aboriginal Australian word. I've lived in 4 continents, 5 countries. Australia has been the last 12 years for me, and it really was an acknowledgement of all the wonderful opportunities I've had in Australia. And why Mawaga? It means crow. The crow has the ability to adapt, transform. The crow demonstrates intelligence. And I thought that has a nice sound to it. And it really stands for the principles of what I like my business to epitomize.
Well, thanks for that. It's very interesting about the crow, right? I think it's a good symbol. I'm often fascinated by crows and murders of crows and how they kind of interact with the environment, and they're amazing creatures. I can totally understand, how it kind of fits together in your, background, your story.
That's right. Not quite human intelligence, but the problem solving skills
The
are there if
problem
you
solving.
observe them. That's right.
Very, persistent in their ways of kinda getting to the outcome that they're looking to get, right?
That,
So I think it demonstrates a lot of persistence and failing and trying and failing and failing and failing and then succeeding. That takes a bit of, persistence to get through some of the stuff that we have to get through on the cybersecurity front, I would say. Um,
absolutely.
and I also like what you said about architecture, that, architects aim for eternity.
That's right.
and how that kind of applies to, what we do in our roles, right? And because I do come to the CISO job from a point of view of technology, right? And what it is, and how it actually works, and how are we going to defend it. And as you say, there's lots of different layers. There are definitely layers that are present inside that, whether it's like where your data is located, the network architecture, how the infrastructure comes together, how the endpoints and the systems that are on the end that your users are using or your other systems are using to get activities completed. All of those things need to be kind of considered when you're thinking about how you're going to defend an organization, whether that's defense against an external threat, insider threats, or regulatory threats, as the case may be. And I do think good architecture has a lot to do with how we can do security well. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about that architecture point of view, because I think that too often we kind of think about compliance architectures, like how do we go into compliance? And compliance is good, right? I mean, it definitely helps us from a CISO point of view to get the funding that we need so that we can move, the game forward. I mean, you were talking about regulators and the pension fund and the CISO leaving, and you having to pick up the slack at that point. It's not always that the regulator's a threat. Sometimes they are a help. It's really just about how you manage the regulator. But at the same time, it's how do you manage the audit committees and the executive committees that are, informing the board and informing the executive committees on risk to the business. But I think it's really hard to do that if you don't understand the business architecture and the technical architecture there, in place at that business. What is it that they're trying to achieve? And then the technology that they're employing to get it done. What do you think?
That's right. I'm glad you separated business architecture from technical architecture. So I'd say I'm a purist enterprise architect in my heart. That's how I look at everything, whether it's AI or security. And when I say enterprise architecture, I use the Zachman framework. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but very, very high level for those that are listening in. The Zachman framework says enterprise architecture is equal to business plus strategy plus technology. And that often leaves engineers quite stumped because they think architecture is all about engineering and tools, etc. But we start with the vision and mission of the firm. We understand that, and then we look at all the business initiatives that helps the business achieve its goals. And then we tie back the technology layer, which is the technology architecture that you're talking about. So all the good stuff that we like. We can call it the AI stack today. I've heard that become a new buzzword or a new thing. And that's fair enough. And we're talking data, networks, identity, etc. And so when we look at it through that broader lens, we can meet regulatory requirements. We can slice and dice and have different views of the architecture. And we can also make a business case and demonstrate return on investment. I need this tool because it helps me accomplish this, which ultimately links back to the mission and objective of our organization. And it makes all those conversations easier. So that's my little secret stash that I keep behind me, all the different, and we can talk NIST, we can talk EU standards, Australian standards, Singapore standards, and everything just fits in very neatly.
But the in that framework you were talking about, like, form follows function, right? You don't go just build a building. There's thoughts that go behind, like, why are we going to build this building? What is it there to do? Right. And then you start talking about, like, if it was a house, is it a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, or is it going to be multi floors, or what is it that we're going to do? What is it we're going to have at the end of it? You can start defining that. But then there's the architecture around how the electricity goes in and how the plumbing goes in and where it, meets the street, and et cetera, et cetera. There's lots and lots of little components that you can see when the building's done. But there was a lot of thought that happened before it happened. And I think that before the building was created. And I think that kind of continue with the analogies of what we do from a security perspective. And a lot of times we just get dropped in, and we got to figure out the culture as a CISO and figure out the business objectives, both the current business objectives and the historical business objectives, and try to understand the history of the company and the culture of that company and how that plays a role in the technology that's being employed, right? And today, the big conversations are around AI, and you were talking about the AI stack. And I feel like I've been doing this a long time, and like maybe seems like 25, 30 years that I've been doing this, IT and IT security. And I feel like we're still today kind of still working in the same constructs that we've had for a long time. In the idea of architecture, we're still using brick and wood and those kinds of like base kind of technologies. And then we're arranging them in different ways to meet a new function that we're trying to perform. But the underlying technology is still, CPU running on network stacks that are inside some subnet that needs to interact with other systems. A lot of the technology is, for me, fundamentally the same, even though the code that's running might be different. Am I thinking about it wrong when we start talking about AI and the AI stack, or something that I'm missing about AI today that I should be incorporating into my thoughts?
I think for me, you're right. We're revisiting the basics. I find I'm often looking at artifacts or case studies of years ago or talking to mentors that, like yourself, have been in industry for and seeing these transformations happen. First, it was cloud, and now it's AI. AI is interesting because we are looking at essentially a transformer architecture
Mhm.
that creates these models. So it's not deterministic, it is probabilistic. And the hallucinations come, and there's almost this human-like behavior where we humans, I believe, we hallucinate too. So we're dealing with a system that is evolving, and it's not fixed and it's not set in time. So I think that part's a bit different. I find it fascinating, yeah.
And I like the way you put it. It's like most of the computing history that we've been dealing with has been deterministic. It's been deterministic, 1 plus 1 equals 2. And we know that that's the right answer. Whereas the transformers are working in probabilistic. Is that how you said it? Um,
Probabilistic, yeah,
Probabilistic,
that's
right?
right.
They're working in a probabilistic manner. And as a result, your inputs and how the system uses those inputs to kind of come up with an answer, it's going to come up with a different answer based on what your inputs were in the prompt or the data that you have available to you or whatever. It's gonna give you what it believes is the most likely answer that you're looking for. That is different with respect to how we think about how we interact with computers, meaning like as a programmer, when I do something in a computer, I'm used to it coming back and it's very set on what I'm expecting the answer to be. And then we have all sorts of practices like test driven development, et cetera, that is kind of takes advantage of the fact that computers are deterministic. But when you start looking at how you program with AI systems, we start to have to make software that takes a probabilistic answer and says, is this the answer that I was looking for? Is it one of 3 different cases that I'm looking for? And then I have to like put guardrails around the output and say, hey, if this is not what I wanted, then I have to go back to the LLM and ask it again, right? And we
Correct,
have like these kind of
correct.
like little kind of control loops that we used to not have, in deterministic programming, that all of a sudden, we have to kind of consider when we're running applications with Gen AI and transformers in particular. I think ML is probably a little bit more deterministic than Gen AI and transformers are.
That's right. And you'd often find you could ask the same question 3 times and there's different answers.
Yeah, tell me a joke. It's gonna tell you a joke, and then you open up a new
Exactly.
prompt, tell me a joke, and it's gonna have a different joke.
That's right. And we have to remind ourselves that this little agentic AI solution doesn't have context of our three-dimensional world. It's taking a probabilistic guess at what it believes is the right answer. So it's quite fascinating because I know I've developed an interesting relationship with the GPTs, etc. But you almost have to ask yourself, but every so often you work with it well, and then you'll get the surprising answer and go, that's because it's still tech, it's not a living and breathing organism. But what's really interesting in our space, John, is I believe in the next month we're about to see our world being unleashed with these really interesting cast of digital characters. So, digital labor is what I call them in the SecOps world. I'm not sure how close you've been to that space of SecOps, but it's evolved into platforms, and I've been hearing the term autonomous SOC being whispered. And there's some clear roadmaps around what the expectation is around that. But certainly in the world of corporate, the buzz has been, how can I get that? Can we get an autonomous SOC? So that's quite interesting because us as security have concerns around how these machines learn, how they're trained, do they hallucinate? But at the same time, there's that intersection of the cyber world and AI, where AI is used to help us solve problems with a spaced cyber defense that's quite challenged. We don't have enough FTEs. We can't really dedicate as much resources to it. There's a talent shortage. And here is a very reasonable way of solving that problem through these
Mhm.
automated solutions that essentially have been trained to act autonomously.
Well, I do want to talk about this because I think that I have a couple of observations that you might find interesting. My last role, I was before coming to SquareX, I was the CISO at Dyson, and one of the technologies that I wanted to take advantage was Security Copilot from Microsoft, right? Because we were an E5 shop, so we had all the Microsoft things. Two AI projects that I, did at Dyson with my security team. And one of them was around Security Copilot, and the other one was trying to introduce some threat intelligence, like an AI startup that was doing threat intelligence around what I call emerging threat identification. It's like early sensing and warning is what we would call it in the military circles, but taking like just threat intelligence and understanding what it is, and then kind of say, is this an impactful thing to my organization? And then what should I be doing about it? And those kinds of activities around threat intelligence. But in both of those cases, I felt like, one of the problems that we have with AI, and I don't think Gen AI is being adopted as quickly as our board wants us to do, or the CEO or the executive committee wants us to approach it. And I think it has to do with who's evaluating it and what their feelings about the evaluation are, right? And I felt like, this as a augmenting capability, right? If you have a SOC already, or if you have a threat intelligence team already, taking some of that burden away from them, where you could use Gen AI and AI technologies to kind of help them reduce the load for them. That I feel like the bar for that to be useful by the folks that are using it is very high, or they're feeling threatened by the technology, and as a result, the adoption of these technologies, I think, is actually going way slower than we would expect it to go, from an executive perspective. Personally, I think that some of the best work that happens in a cyber environment is actually happens with the SOC. And it's the application of that human intelligence against what they're seeing and trying to extrapolate what's actually happening. That's like some of the most valuable resources we have. However, you know, people aren't as consistent as computers, right? They may have a bad day, they may be tired, they may be hungover, who knows what's going on with them. But also getting them to just like tag information correctly and go through all those pieces and parts, where it would be great to have them apply that human intelligence. It's kind of also probabilistic, right? It's definitely not deterministic when you have humans doing work. But I do feel like there is a tremendous opportunity in, like you said, autonomous SOC. I think there's lots of opportunities in a lot of places that there's a lot of work being done by humans, that we know it well enough that we could train a Gen AI system to kind of do that work, in computer time rather than human time, and do things that we may have only done 8 by 5, that we could do 24 by 7, and use computers to do that. I think there's opportunity there. Well, I'm not feeling like they're being adopted as quickly as you would expect them to be. What are you seeing?
Yeah, interesting this conversation. It's been really close to me. I actually commissioned myself to do some dedicated work around this, and I called my paper Navigating the Future of Cybersecurity, AI Assistance in the SOC. I presented my paper as I was doing the research a month ago in Ireland. at a security architecture conference, and I put the question out there and I said, what if digital labor was your newest hire? How would you onboard it, and how would you know it's doing a good job? And there was a lot of extensive work I did behind this. So what I did is took the MITRE 11 strategies. I don't know if you've seen this white paper. It's really interesting. But what it does is it's written by these fantastic people from the world of MITRE, and they've laid out these 11 strategies. A few of them are really focused on the mission and objective of the SOC, the data quality that goes into the SOC, collaborating, etc. And so when you put the AI lens over that, you still have to ask yourself those questions. Are those agents capable of making those judgments? Where and when do you have the human labor in the loop? What was really interesting, I've seen more progress with this with in the world of the MSSPs that deliver those managed SOC. But in enterprise, that's a challenge. What I have heard whispers of, and this might upset some SOC analysts, is executive level ambition on replacing essentially their cyber practices with an autonomous SOC service. So I think this will be a really interesting space to watch, especially from next month as we start to see Microsoft Ignite, reInvent, so announcements around Sentinel. We're going to see this fancy Hollywood cast of what I call agents, triage agents, agents that respond, threat intelligent agents, detection engineering. I've even heard that.
Mhm,
And then
mhm.
orchestrator agents that actually orchestrate all these agents together. So it's quite fascinating. There is a paper I saw by IBM that expects a fully autonomous SOC in 2027, which isn't that far away, but that doesn't mean that's, across enterprise, etc. I think we'll start to see that possibly in some closed shape and form within big hyperscalers and on environments where it is possible. So it might not be the all of my services, but certainly maybe protecting crown jewels that are
Mhm.
in the cloud, because you'd have to have full visibility and context of your assets to be able to actually draw conclusions on, yes, can I actually shut this workstation down, or am I shutting this payment system down? And you don't want an agentic bot to make that decision on behalf of humans.
Right. I was a VP at an MSSP many years ago. I ran the security operations center. The systems for an MSSP are completely different than an enterprise system. Their form follows function. It's meant for a SOC person to make a decision quickly. So all the information kind of comes to that console at one time so that they can make a decision quickly. And there's a lot of stuff that's, decisions about mediums and lows happen somewhere else. It's all computer deterministic kind of problems that they can say this is a low or a medium or a high. And if it's high or critical, it goes to a human. Humans have all the information so they can make a decision and they go. The data is very well done, meaning that the sensor data, how the sensor data comes and how it gets into the system that's making a decision about whether this is a alert to worry about or not worry about, all that stuff is plumbed really super well from end to end. That is not an enterprise system. I have never seen an enterprise system. And I worked in the SOC at JP Morgan Chase. I, grew that global SOC out back in like 2014. It's not a matter of money, right? JP Morgan Chase has tons of money to apply to the problem. It's the architects, the engineers, it's the new systems and the deprecation of systems and legacy old systems that can't support RFC, whatever, for date time formats. There's all sorts of problems that happen in enterprise environments that you can't just clean up and put into your SOC. So you have a data in problem, right? If it's garbage in, garbage out. And so I think the interesting part is that I think we will see autonomous SOCs. 2027 sounds personally reasonable. I don't think it's going to be in enterprises. I think it's going to be in MSSPs or very, closed loop systems that are very controllable. And then you probably get some good results. It'll be super interesting to see, what Microsoft comes out with respect to, Sentinel and SOCs. I know that there's tons and tons of venture funded companies that are doing a lot of Gen AI stuff. It'll be interesting how Microsoft has approached the work. Because there's lots of people that use Microsoft in their SOCs. So yeah. I mean, like you were saying, I think it's going to be you're still going to have humans in the loop start thinking about which systems to take down or what to block. I think that the context matters, but that context can be learned and can be derived by a system. And you can still have, all because you're using Gen AI doesn't mean that you can't use other deterministic systems also with it. These are going to be some sort of blended model between Gen AI and machine learning and also rules based systems. I think those will all kind of come together so that the right information is going to a decision maker, whether that decision maker is a human or a Gen AI agent, right? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
mhm.
I'm wondering when we're going to start talking browsers because we're in a
Yeah.
SquareX podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, I think architecturally, you somewhat have to think about where your
Mm,
users are. I think if you just followed, SOC events around the world and you just saw when your SOC events were really just kicking off, it always follows the user, like user populations. It's like as users
that's
are
right.
doing work in the world, it seems like the number of events that a SOC has kind of follow where your user populations are. And I think that it's a key component of like, hey, how is it that we're going to secure our environments? Is thinking about your users and what kind of systems they use. And as you said, like our point of view at SquareX is that the browser isn't it's very well instrumented internally, meaning that there's a lot of information that's available internally, but we don't have a lot of security products that are looking at what's happening in the browser. Just because we're spending a lot of time looking at EDR events and different kinds of network events are happening on the operating system. But today, more and more applications are being delivered through SaaS platforms than 10 years ago, for sure. Right. I think about 51% of IT spend in the enterprises is happening through SaaS today or through cloud today, then 51% of IT spend is happening to cloud and SaaS products. So that kind of tells me that the use of the browser is much heavier today than it was 10 years ago when I was doing my work at JP Morgan Chase or other companies, Expedia Group. The work that we were doing was mostly private data centers and private offices, whereas today a lot of that work is being done with SaaS running on cloud platforms. Web software is being delivered via browsers, not fat apps that were happening to us, 10 years ago. So there's been a big shift in how we operate IT and how users interact with applications. But the security of browsers really hasn't evolved with those times, right? So, our premise is that it's time to take a look at the browser, right? And if all of those things are true, right? And, if we're talking about the data that's being housed on SaaS platforms, and we've been talking about Gen AI, how has this shift changed the security challenges that you're tackling?
That's a really, really interesting question. Yeah, especially given just a week ago, we had a very interesting release from ChatGPT, the ChatGPT world, which was Atlas, the browser. And I couldn't wait to get my hands off it because I'm an Apple person, heart and soul. But I don't have my laptop, so I haven't been able to use it. But I've been reading all the reviews, and when I read it, there's part of me that's thinking innovation, and I'm really excited because I'm always interested in innovation. But then one part of me is going, oh my God, how is this actually safe? And sure enough, your team at SquareX has discovered some challenges already with using Atlas, and I think it was also the Perplexity browser, where you've got threat actors able to mimic and recreate those extensions, so the sidebars look exactly like you're talking to ChatGPT. And me and you might be more savvy in, oh, okay, it's asking me for my Google Drive access. I shouldn't do that. Or it's about to, send me off to a naughty domain. But your average business user, or even my little son, will cluelessly give out information or let it take over, and next thing you know, it's got admin access to your laptop. And so very, very concerning. I sat in on the SquareX session at Tech Field Day, and I absolutely enjoyed it. I think the rest of the delegates did too. We wanted more, so we hope to see the SquareX team again next time. When I first thought about it. I've just rolled off this big piece of work that still continues, but was making the business case to get Defender into an organization. And even that was, there was so many challenges and tuning and design considerations. We hadn't even thought about the browser. And I went, oops, actually, all the work that I do today, or any other business user, when you dial into a Teams meeting, there's 30 tabs open. So one moment I'm looking at payroll, or I'm looking at my performance in Workday, or I'm, making sure sometimes if you just quickly doing a bit of personal admin, but so much of my world is in the browser. Generally, you only ever have an Outlook open and your browser window, and the browser's turned into my personal workspace, but there's no protection and safeguards in place. And what I love about the SquareX solution is we're not introducing a new browser that's hard coded and all safeguarded, but we're adding an extension. So we're meeting the user. Again, we're thinking human-centric solution. So we're not making it cumbersome for them, but we're almost training them to get familiar with, oh, if I click on this, is this okay? And I think that's almost become a second, that cautious step has been baked into corporate users today because they're used to questioning and thinking, should I do this? So it seems intuitive to me. And I'm just very curious to see how this goes with the Atlas release, because often when we use the technology in our personal lives and there's a big uptake for it, which I think there will be at some point in time when there's more guardrails put in there, I think the expectation at work will be, I do this in my personal, I want to do this in my workspace too. So how do we find that balance? Curious to see how this space evolves.
Yeah, for sure. I think that what we're seeing is the way that I kind of categorize browser AI agents, whether it's a AI agent that's an extension or you take ChatGPT's Atlas and you put it in there, you have that as your agent. In both those cases, just like our kids or our parents, they're not as in tune about cybersecurity and security practice as you and I are, right? And I think the AI agents are that way as well. They're not in tune also. No one forced them to do security training before they, got on the web. So when we have them do work for us, like you say, hey, Gmail, and I want to find all my receipts that were involved with my trip to Chicago. How can I get that summarized so I can do my expense report, or just go do my expense report for me? Right. What we ask it to do, the AI agent is going to take an enthusiastic approach to go get that done. And if it can go find different kinds of tools and technologies to help it get that work done, it's just going to accept and consent on your behalf using your credentials to go get that work done, which could lead you into a place where you're making yourself or your company vulnerable to different kinds of attacks from a outside actor, right? Because there's lots of ways of attacking Gen AI tools, right? And prompt injection, indirect prompt injection, just message you on Teams somewhere, and it can mess up your data or extract information. So there's lots and lots of vectors that are there. And I am also super curious on like how the world's going to react to the first incident. And I think, we're within months from a huge incident like coming out where this became the problem. And we're seeing the research on the SquareX side that these systems are, vulnerable, right? And of course, with the right guardrails, the same guardrails that we would give to a human, whether we're managing OAuth or SSO or allowing people to log in or what kind of passwords they're allowed to use or whitelisting these set of sites for your work or blacklisting other sites. Securing what's happening in the browser, I think, could go a long way to securing your use of Gen AI inside a browser agent inside Chrome or, a complete browser product. So lots to see there. I think in the coming
That's
months.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a space that's going to continue to surprise us and challenge us, and there'll be plenty of innovations to come there. Is my view on that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So as you look to where AI is heading in the next 2 to 3 years, what's the one emerging challenge that keeps you up at night and what gives you the most hope?
So honestly, what has kept me up at night is the pace of change. As a technology professional, I enjoy reading, experimenting, training myself, and saying this year I'll complete that cert. But the pace of change is just so tremendous. I have to admit, sometimes I've said, oh, I feel like I'm going to fall behind. But then it's just reminding myself, hey, we're still back to basics, like you said before. We're just dealing with a new technology. The foundations to for it to function well are still the same. And I think what gives me hope then is I love to think about the innovation umbrella. And in cyber, we can embrace that too. We don't have to fight innovation because I think innovation and governance, they mature each other. And when I think broadly about innovation, it's not chaotic experimentation, but it's a disciplined approach to managing uncertainty. And I think that's what gives me hope. I think the fact that we've got this interesting technology that it is in the hands of almost every user on this planet is quite fascinating, and it will create challenges. But I do hope there's leadership across the world in technology and in business that says, let's embrace this and let's use innovation as the underpinning umbrella to do this. And again, when I say innovation, a lot of that is around when I think about the pillars, there's adoption of innovation. Yes, we tested something. Does it work? As is it just money we threw at it from a corporate, or did we actually invest in a methodological way and we put some metrics around it and we actually want to see efficiencies and productivity increases? um, and improvements in the customer experience. An improvement in customer experience today is also about trust because customers want to know, if we consume your services as a business, can I trust you to do the right thing? So I think really focusing on those foundational aspects of building these technologies and embracing them, and training again is a big part. And training, John, as you know, is a big challenge now because are we just training people for red flags, or are we training them to be proactive and be more aware? I myself, 2 weeks ago, got a surprising phone call. It was from an agentic bot, but it was a woman in her 30s with a beautiful Australian accent. And she said, I was having lunch and I was expecting a phone call about something else, and it was from an Australian mobile number. So I thought I must answer because it might be this personal appointment. And so the agentic bot says, hello, I'm an agentic bot calling on behalf of a business. And I froze because one part of me was curious to know why an agentic bot was calling me an AI agent. But the other part of me was going, oh, if I speak up, I might have my voice recorded, and then I've got another problem. But then in that split second, I decided to put the phone down. So I didn't hear the full story. But for me, I thought, well, I don't take unsolicited calls from humans. So why would I take an unsolicited call from an AI agent? And so I still have hope. I always have hope. I'm really positive. But I really believe if we have a disciplined approach, and we can come together as industry verticals or as cyber professionals. I've been part of AI innovation hubs in corporates. That's really interesting. But when we talk innovation there, we should also talk about ethics, governance, security, etc., because it all goes hand in hand to make these fantastic technologies actually add value to our lives. So we can do all the creative stuff, and all the grind can be done by the machines.
You can only hope. Yeah, yeah,
We don't want the
yeah.
reverse, do we?
Right, let the machines
Yeah.
do the grinding work. But I think that the innovation is there's so much investment in Gen AI today and across so many different industries, that and I think that's why we feel the pressure. It's just there's just so much money being poured into it, and as a result, there's a lot to look at. And that is the challenge. That is part of the challenge, but I do agree with you. I think that the fundamentals are still the same. whether it's an AI agent doing the work or a human doing the work, we still need to apply critical thinking, technical controls. We've been dealing with hallucinating humans for, tens of thousands of years. So we know what to do. I think the hard part is getting past that deterministic kind of mindset that we think computers are always right because they're deterministic, and understand that probabilistic part of what's going on here so that we can click on our critical thinking skills as we kind of approach how we solve problems. So I really enjoyed our conversation, Vriti. Thanks for staying up and talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, John.
Thanks, Vriti.